Mist rolled over the hills, soft and pale as a whisper, wrapping the Sumi village in a veil of morning quiet. Huts of woven bamboo and thatched roofs clung to the earth, huddled beneath the shadow of towering forests. The villagers stirred with the dawn, tending to fields and fires, their lives bound to the rhythm of the land. Among them, a boy moved alone. His name was Toshi. Toshi's days passed in silence. Since his parents' death, the village had turned cold toward him. They said he was marked, cursed by the spirits who had taken his mother and father with a fever no shaman could cure. No one spoke to him unless they had to. Children did not play with him. Yet Toshi never cried. He had learned that tears meant weakness, and weakness had no place where survival hung on the edge of a blade. When his chores were done, Toshi sought the solitude of the cliffs beyond the village. There the world stretched wide. The wind rushed wild and sharp, carrying the cries of eagles that circled high overhead. Toshi would sit for hours watching them, golden feathers flashing like flame against the sky. He wondered what it felt like to be free, to leave everything below and fly. One evening, as the sun bled red along the horizon, Toshi found something strange at the cliff's edge. Sprawled in the grass was an eagle, a great one, its wings bent at an awkward angle. Its eyes, fierce and golden, fixed on him as he knelt beside it. Blood streaked its feathers. For a moment, Toshi hesitated. The villagers would tell him to leave it. A wounded creature was a bad omen, a sign of death. But something in the eagle's gaze held him. Carefully, he slid his hands beneath its body. The bird did not fight. It was too weak. In the weeks that followed, Toshi nursed the eagle back to strength. Each day, he carried scraps of meat stolen from the village hunters, feeding the creature in secret. He spoke to it when no one else would listen. The eagle never answered, but its sharp gaze softened as the days passed. When at last its wings healed, Toshi carried it back to the cliffs. He expected the bird to fly away, to leave him as everyone else had. But the eagle lingered, watching as Toshi turned to go. Then, with a single cry, it took to the sky. Its wings spread wide, catching the wind. Toshi smiled, a rare thing for him. For the first time, he did not feel so alone. The eagle returned the next day, and the day after. Soon, others came, 3, then 5, then more. They circled the cliffs when Toshi appeared, as if waiting for him. The villagers whispered that he had been touched by the eagle's spirits. Some grew wary. Others said he was no longer entirely human. Toshi did not care. Among the eagles, he felt a sense of belonging that no human voice had ever offered. One night, under the silver light of a full moon, the first eagle returned. It landed before Toshi and fixed him with a steady gaze. The air grew heavy, thick with something unspoken. Then the eagle stretched its wings wide and, without a sound, leapt into the sky. Toshi felt a pull deep in his chest. Without knowing why, he followed. The climb was steep, but Toshi's legs were strong. The eagle led him higher than he had ever dared, beyond the last edge of the village, where no hunter traveled. Hours passed, and still he climbed. His breath came hard, but he did not stop. At last, when the stars hung low and the wind howled around the peaks, the eagle slowed. Ahead, hidden within jagged rocks, lay a place no human had ever seen. A nest, vast and ancient, rested beneath a hollowed cliff. Eagles, more than Toshi could count, roost there, their golden eyes gleaming in the dark. As he stepped forward, the air seemed to hum. Toshi felt no fear. He belonged here. Somehow he had always belonged. For many seasons, Toshi lived among the eagles. They taught him the ways of the mountains, the hidden springs, the paths no human feet had walked. He learned to hunt with their precision, to see as they did, with eyes sharp enough to catch the smallest movement. His hands grew strong, his spirit sharper. When he ran with them, it felt almost like flying. The Eagle King, an ancient bird with feathers the color of fire, watched Toshi closely. It was said that the Eagle King was no ordinary creature, but a spirit who had lived for centuries, guarding the secrets of the sky. One night, as the winds howled through the peaks, the Eagle King came to Toshi and spoke. not in words, but in a voice that filled his mind like thunder. "You walk between two worlds," the Eagle King said, "but your path is not yet finished." Toshi bowed his head. He did not understand what the spirit meant, but he knew the words held truth. He had come far, yet something still pulled at him, a thread that tied him to the village he had left behind. One morning, as the sun broke across the jagged peaks, the eagle who had first come to him landed at Toshi's side. It cocked its head, watching him with an intensity that stirred something deep within. Toshi knew then it was time to return. When he descended the mountain, the village had changed, but not as much as he had. His shoulders were broader, his movements fluid as a shadow. His eyes, once filled with quiet pain, now held the glint of something fierce and untamed. The villagers stopped and stared as he passed. A group of hunters watched from the edge of the square. They remembered the orphan boy, but the one who stood before them now was a stranger. Some whispered he was no longer human. Others saw the way the eagles followed him, gliding overhead, and wondered if the spirits had sent him back for a reason. Toshi said nothing. He had no need to explain himself. He had returned because he must, but what awaited him in the village was still unknown. The wind stirred at his back as he walked toward the heart of the village, and somewhere above, an eagle's cry pierced the sky. Toshi's return did not go unnoticed. The village, bound by routine and suspicion, had not forgotten the orphan boy who had once been cast aside. But the figure who now walked among them was no longer a frail, silent child. He carried himself with quiet strength, his movements fluid as water, his gaze as sharp as the eagles that still circled above. At first, the villagers watched from a distance. Some feared him, whispering that the mountains had changed him into something more beast than man. Others wondered if the spirits had sent him back as an omen of things to come. Toshi did not care for their rumors. He had learned in the high peaks that words held no weight against the truth of one's actions. He spent his days helping where he could, hunting in the dense forests and bringing back more game than the village had seen in months. His hands, now calloused from years among the eagles, wove strong traps and shaped fine weapons. Yet no matter how much he gave, a shadow of doubt hung over him. The village did not forget easily, and trust was not offered freely. It was during one of these days, as Toshi repaired a broken section of the village wall, that he first saw her. Liane. She moved with grace, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders as she carried a basket of wild herbs. The sunlight caught the edge of her smile, warm, unguarded. Toshi should not have stared, but something about her held him still. Unlike the others, she did not avert her gaze when their eyes met. Instead, she offered a nod and a soft greeting before continuing on her way. Days passed, and their paths crossed again and again. At the riverbank, where Liane gathered reeds for weaving, Toshi found himself watching her from the tree line. When he finally stepped forward to help carry her load, she accepted without hesitation. Her voice was steady, curious, never once shrinking from his silence. "You're not what they say you are," she told him one evening, her hands deftly braiding a basket. Toshi hesitated before answering. "What do they say?" "That you're part eagle," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "That you no longer belong to us." "And what do you believe?" he asked quietly. Liane glanced at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I believe there is more to you than what others see." Her words stirred something deep within him. No one had ever spoken to him this way, not with kindness, not with trust. And against his better judgment, he began to speak more freely. He told her of the mountains, of the winds that carried him beyond the reach of human hands. He did not speak of the Eagle King's prophecy. Some truths were too heavy to share. In return, Liane told him of the village, the burdens of expectation, the quiet longing for a life beyond the narrow paths she walked. Her father, a respected elder, expected her to marry a man of strength and standing. There were few choices and fewer still that stirred her heart. A connection, fragile but undeniable, grew between them. Toshi found himself seeking her presence as naturally as he sought the wind. With Liane, The silence he had once clung to felt less like a shield and more like a weight he no longer wished to carry. But not all in the village welcomed his return. Among the hunters stood a man named Akin, a broad-shouldered warrior known for his temper and ambition. Akin had long sought Liani's hand, believing his strength and status made him her rightful match. Toshi's presence, quiet yet unyielding, unsettled him. It did not take long for jealousy to twist into resentment. One evening, as the village gathered around the central fire for a harvest festival, Akin confronted Toshi. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and the sound of drums. But the mood grew tense when Akin stepped forward, his voice loud enough to still the conversation around them. "You walk among us as though you belong," he said, his lip curling. "But no matter how many deer you bring or how many baskets you carry, you are still an outsider. If you wish to stay, prove your worth." Toshi met his gaze without flinching. He had no desire for conflict, but he would not turn away from it. The villagers, sensing a challenge, fell into an expectant silence. Akin gestured toward the edge of the forest, where the land sloped into shadow. "3 trials," he declared. "Strength, skill, and courage. Face them, and perhaps you'll earn your place. Fail, and you return to the mountains where you belong." Liani stepped forward, her face pale with anger. "This is foolishness," she said. "Toshi has already proven his worth." But Toshi raised a hand to quiet her. There were some things that could not be settled with words alone. "I accept," he said. The first trial tested strength. At dawn, the villagers gathered near the river where smooth stones lay heavy and unyielding. Akin heaved the largest onto his shoulders, carrying it across the water's edge before dropping it with a triumphant snarl. His strength was undeniable. When Toshi stepped forward, whispers rippled through the crowd. He was lean where Akin was broad, quiet where Akin was loud. But when he lifted the stone, his movements were sure and steady. He did not stagger. He did not strain. The years in the mountains had honed his muscles as surely as the eagle's wings cut the wind. When he placed the stone beyond where Akin had dropped his, a hush fell over the onlookers. The second trial tested skill. With bows in hand, they stood before a distant target, a feather swaying in the breeze. Akin's arrow flew swift and sure, grazing the feather's edge. It was a fine shot, but when Toshi drew his bow, he did not aim with his eyes alone. He felt the wind on his skin, the faint tremor in the earth beneath his feet. His arrow struck true, splitting the feather down its heart. The final trial tested courage. As twilight fell, the 2 men climbed the jagged cliffs that marked the village's boundary. At its highest peak grew the moonflower, a pale blossom that bloomed only once each season. The path was treacherous, sharp rocks threatening to tear flesh from bone. Akin climbed with the fury of a man who refused to be bested. But Toshi climbed with the patience of the eagles, steady, swift, and without fear. It was Toshi who returned first, the moonflower cradled in his hand. Akin arrived moments later, blood trailing from a gash along his forearm. Though his face was shadowed with anger, he could not deny what the village already knew. Toshi had won. The elders, bound by tradition, declared the trials finished. Whatever doubts had lingered were laid to rest. Toshi had proven himself not only as a man of strength and skill, but as one who carried the heart of the village within him. That night, as the fires burned low and the stars stretched wide above them, Liani found Toshi standing at the edge of the cliffs. She stepped beside him, her hand brushing his arm. "They will never question you again," she said softly. Toshi did not answer at once. His heart, which had once belonged only to the winds, now held something more fragile, more precious. When he turned to Liani, there was no hesitation in his voice. "And what do you believe?" he asked. "I believe," she said, her voice warm against the night air, "that you were always meant to return." For the first time since he had descended from the mountains, Toshi felt something settle within him, a sense that his place was no longer with the eagles alone. The wind still called to him, but so did she. Yet deep in his heart, the words of the Eagle King lingered. "Your path is not yet finished. The days following Toshi's victory brought a quiet change to the village. No longer did the people speak of him in hushed, suspicious tones. Where once there had been wariness, there was now a growing sense of respect. He had proven his strength, his skill, and his courage, but more than that, he had proven that he belonged. And beside him, always was Liani. Their bond deepened as the seasons turned. They walked together through the forests, gathering wild herbs and sharing quiet laughter. In the evenings, beneath the light of the moon, they sat side by side, speaking of dreams they had never before dared to voice. Toshi, who had once believed himself tied to no one, now felt the weight and warmth of a heart intertwined with his own. Yet peace was a fragile thing. Tensions between the Sumi village and the neighboring tribe of the Angami had simmered for years. The forest between their lands was rich with game, but both villages claimed it as their own. For generations, the dispute had remained a distant threat, a shadow on the edge of their lives. But shadows grow long when left unchallenged. One morning, the warning came. A breathless scout arrived at the village square, his face pale with fear. Angami warriors had been seen along the eastern ridge, armed, restless, and too many to ignore. The message was clear. The time for peace was ending. The village elders gathered in haste, their voices low and troubled. Some called for a preemptive strike, fearing that to wait would be to invite ruin. Others argued for negotiation, but their words held little hope. The Angami were proud and fierce. They would not give ground easily. Toshi stood at the edge of the council's circle, silent but watchful, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He had not returned to the village to watch it burn. Yet he knew, as surely as he knew the shape of the wind, that force alone would not bring peace. That night, unable to sleep, Toshi climbed to the cliffs where the eagles still gathered. The wind whipped against his skin, but he welcomed its bite. His heart was heavy with questions no human voice could answer. It was there, beneath the stars, that the Eagle King came to him. The great bird descended without sound, his wings folding in solemn grace. His golden eyes gleamed with an ancient light, and when he spoke, his voice echoed within Toshi's soul. "You have walked between two worlds," the Eagle King said, "but now you stand at a crossing. What you choose will shape not only your fate, but the fate of those you love." Toshi bowed his head. "I do not seek war," he said quietly, "but I will not let my people be destroyed." The Eagle King regarded him in silence for a moment before extending one great wing. In its shadowed curve lay a single feather, long, slender, and shimmering with an iridescent light that seemed to hold the sky itself. "This is no ordinary gift," the Eagle King said. "It carries the wisdom of the winds and the strength of the mountains. In times of darkness, it will reveal the path unseen. But be warned, Toshi, such power is not given lightly. Once used, it cannot be undone." Toshi knelt, accepting the feather with reverence. The air hummed with a quiet power as his fingers closed around it. "I will wield it wisely," he vowed. When dawn broke over the village, the shadow of war hung heavier than ever. Scouts returned with grim news. The Angami warriors had moved closer, their numbers too great for the Sumi to repel. Panic flickered at the edges of the villagers' hearts. Toshi stepped forward. "I will go to them," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "I will speak on behalf of the village. If there is a chance for peace, we must take it." Aiken, still nursing the wounds to his pride, scoffed. "They will cut you down before you open your mouth." Liani's face was pale, but her gaze held no fear. "He will not go alone," she said quietly. But Toshi shook his head. "This is a burden I must carry." Without another word, he turned and left the village behind. The journey to the Angami camp was long and treacherous. The forest, once a place of solace, now seemed heavy with unseen eyes. Yet Toshi moved without hesitation. The eagle feather tucked against his chest warmed with a faint, steady pulse, guiding his steps when the path grew uncertain. At the edge of the enemy's camp, he stopped. Angami warriors, tall and broad, circled their fires. Their faces were hard, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. Toshi knew the risk he took. One wrong word, one false step, and blood would be spilled before nightfall. He stepped forward. The Angami guards raised their spears, but Toshi did not flinch. His voice, when he spoke, was as steady as the wind. "I come not as an enemy," he said, "but as a man seeking peace." They did not lower their weapons, but neither did they strike. A tall figure emerged from the camp center, a man with a face lined by years and a gaze like fire. The Angami chieftain. His eyes narrowed as he studied Toshi. "You speak of peace," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But words are wind. Why should we trust you?" Toshi reached for the feather. As he held it high, a shimmering light burst forth, illuminating the camp in a golden glow. Gasps rippled through the gathered warriors. In the feather's light, the air grew still, and for a breathless moment, the anger that had burned between their peoples cooled. "This feather is a gift from the spirit of the eagles," Toshi said. "It is a sign that blood need not be shed. Let us share the forest's bounty. There is enough for all." The Angami chieftain's face remained unreadable, but the light of the feather lingered in his eyes. At last he spoke. "You have courage," he said, "and wisdom beyond your years. Perhaps your people are not so different from ours." With those words, the course of fate shifted. By the time Toshi returned to the village, the threat of war had passed. The Angami had agreed to share the land, and the fragile peace that followed would stretch for generations. When he stepped through the village gate, Liani was waiting. Without a word, she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. The weight of fear, of uncertainty, melted away. In her touch, he felt the warmth of home, a home he had fought to protect, and a love he had no longer any reason to deny. The village celebrated their victory, but Toshi and Liani sought no fanfare. In the quiet of the forest, beneath the moon's silver gaze, they pledged themselves to one another. Their love, tested by trials and tempered by fire, was stronger than any force that sought to break it. The years stretched onward, but the legend of Toshi and Liani remained. It was said that the eagles still watched over their descendants, guiding them when the path grew dark. And in the highest peaks, where the wind sings through stone, the Eagle King's gift still waits, for those with hearts brave enough to seek it. But for Toshi and Liani, there was no need for further gifts. They had found in each other something greater, a love as vast as the sky and as enduring as the mountains themselves.